Okay, I'm going to do a breakdown of showing you how to do a wedge increase. Now, if I recall, Janae does it a little differently. It's up to you. You can do it a little differently. This kind of keeps the uniformity to it. And this is just my preferred method. And there's a preferred method I do for the decreasing. And the whole reason for it is it gives almost a line. I have a nice line when I do the method of the way I do the increasing and the decreasing, and it's uniform between the two, okay? So that if you're doing increasing and decreasing, you're not going to be able to notice it on the garment, whether it's an increase or decrease, because it's uniform, okay? So this is personally how I increase on the X Loom. And you can do this increase on any loom, really, okay? You don't have to do it on the X Loom. You can do this as an increase on any loom you want, alright? So what I'm going to do is just work my way to my wedge peg. And I will show this from the right hand method, okay? So what you're going to do is, this is basically a twin knit. So what you're going to do is you're going to find your first notch or stitch, okay, which is right there. You'll see it. It's the first one that's sitting on top. You're going to take it back. Keep hold of it. Do not release it. Then you're going to place the working yarn in front of the peg. Then you're going to take that stitch you pulled back and place it back to where it goes, okay? Then you're going to take that stitch you just made, and you're going to lift it up. You can place it on this peg, or you can go ahead and place it on that empty peg, okay? Because normally I go in and I tighten up my stitches. So I'll show you how to place it on that empty peg, but you can place it on the previous peg. Okay, then you're going to knit the stitch, the point down like I always do on the wedge pegs. Okay. Now, what you're doing, and to keep in mind, let's say you are wanting to work a KB loom or some other loom that has a lot more wedges in between, what your idea is to increase from the first wedge peg and then go to the next peg that is not a wedge peg, the very next peg that is not a wedge peg, and increase there, okay? So if you're wanting to increase on one that has, say, more than 2, that's what you're doing. Okay, again, you'll notice I've knitted my wedge pegs, and I'm finding that next stitch that's right on top, that first notch. I'm pulling it back, placing that working yarn in front of that peg, and then placing that stitch back. Okay, then I'm going to lift that stitch up and put it there, and typically I go ahead and knit this stitch. Alright, now I undo my washer and push the wedge down. Alright, the next thing I like to do is I do like to tighten up those stitches as best I can. So I go in and I tighten up the stitches starting from the wedge. Try not to get them too tight. You need to be able to work with them the next round. Alright, I'm going to show you one more time, and then I'll show you the right hand method. Alright. Okay, so you go ahead and you knit the peg that's before the wedge pegs. Alright. On the actual physical pegs, no matter what, on the very first one you increase with, okay? So you're going to lift that very first stitch like this, pull it back. Do not release it. Place the working yarn over the peg, take that back, and put it back. Then you're going to pick up that stitch. You can put it here to move it later, or you can just put it here, okay? It's up to you. There's more than one way to skin a cat, as I always say. And then you're going to knit your wedge pegs. Alright. Then you're going to take that previous stitch, which is right there. You're going to pull it back. Then you're going to place the working yarn over and move it down one as you place that stitch back. Then you're going to move your wedge down, and then you can go in and tighten up your pegs. Now, let's say you're doing a pattern and you come across a, say, purled wedge, and you're like, I don't know, because that's not technically your first one. Okay, so for instance, this is a purled, alright, and it dips down, as you can see. You will pick it up as well, okay? You will just pick it up, alright? Now remember, when you're doing this, your working yarn needs to be in the center so that you can pull that stitch back. So you're going to pull that stitch back, even though it's stuck up in between there, alright? You're going to be pulling that stitch back, alright? You're going to be putting that working yarn over the front again, but when you go to put it back, be careful not to lose your original stitch in there, okay? And then you're going to move that working yarn, okay, over. Okay, and that is an increase. And as you can see, it is a little bit more complicated when it comes to doing a purl increase, okay? But you may have to do that at times. Let's say you're working a garter stitch, and this would be your knit row. You can purl these stitches if you're needing to, okay? If you're increasing and you need to purl the stitches, you just do whatever's next, okay? So you're going to go in and you're going to find that first one if you're working with a purl, okay? And you're going to pull it over. Place the working yarn over the top and place it back, making sure not to take your original stitch back over there, okay? So, and I did this wrong. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. You, knit the peg. Okay. Now, you find it, which is right here. Pick it up, take it over, place the working yarn in front, and you may need to try and hold the original stitch down, okay, which is like that. Okay, and when you're doing that, a lot of times the stitch you just created is underneath your original. You're going to pull it out and put it to the next peg. Now that's if you're working a wedge that has purls, okay? So it's not impossible. It's a little more complicated, but you can do it. All right. Now I can tell you right now, with any increase row, you need to do a knit row after it, or a purl row, or whatever you're doing. You need to do that after it, okay? You can't keep doing increase, 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 or you will end up with one heck of a mess. Alright, so you always need to do a knit row in between. Alright, so I'm going to kind of finish this row up, and then what I want to do is show you how to do an increase from the right hand method. Okay, I'm going to show you how to increase when you're right-handed on the wedge. Okay, and what you want to do is work your way over to your first wedge peg. Okay, now hold your yarn, working yarn in the middle, find your first notch, which is right here, pull back, keep hold of it, put the working yarn in front of the peg, place that stitch back, pick that stitch up, and you know it's that stitch when it moves easily and it's your working yarn. You can place it on the next available peg because you're increasing. Okay, then you're going to knit both those stitches, just like that. Okay. Then you take the next peg that's not the wedge, last wedge peg, you take the next peg that is just after the wedge peg. You're going to take that notch and you're going to pull it back. You're not going to release it. Remember, your working yarn needs to be in the middle when you do this so that you can wrap it around, place the stitch back, pick the stitch you just made up, and move it over to the next available peg. Move down, tighten the wedge, and tighten the stitches up. And then increasing on the X loom is more complicated than decreasing, and a lot of times if you're working first projects you are doing a hat, which is only decreasing. But this loom also allows you to do a reverse hat where you start from the crown and you work down. So you'll do the same method where you're trying to work it towards the peg count you want, and you may want to put markers for that. If you're trying to increase from the crown down to the brim, you might want to mark off with rubber bands where you're increasing to. Okay. Alright, again, I'll show you how to increase. You can take that first notch on your first wedge peg back over. Do not release it while having your working yarn in the middle. Put it in front of the peg, place the stitch back, pick up the stitch you just made, and put it on the new. Then knit your wedges. Okay, then on the very, and this includes on if you're having more than one wedge, if you're working on a different loom like a KB loom that has a moving compartment, you just knit your way over and then you do this on the next peg that is not the wedge. Okay, pull your next notch back with your working yarn in the middle of the loom, place that in front of the peg, place that stitch you pulled back where it goes, pick up the stitch and put it on there, and then you can knit this peg. Okay, then you go in and you extend it. Remember, on increasing rows you need to go in and do a single row of knit or whatever you're doing, and whenever you're increasing you just increase like this, and if you're knitting and purling, keep in mind with that. I find that increasing and decreasing with, say, a seed stitch is actually really easy. If you're doing a rib, it can be a pain. So in my personal opinion, a rib stitch is a pain. Okay, and then just knit your way over. Alright, so that is how you do an increase with the right hand method and an increase from the left hand method. Next I'll show you how to do a decrease, which is easy.